Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's get this shared. There we go. Okay, and one more setting here. Okay. Can everyone hear me and see that main screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me this evening to talk to a bird group about frogs. I know you're more than just a bird group and that you're naturalists at large. So I appreciate everyone's interest today. Yeah, and so like Deborah said, my name's Bennett Hardy. I'm a researcher at the NAT down in San Diego. And I'm going to be talking today about these jumping frogs, the California red-legged frog, which is our state amphibian, and what the NAT and our partners are doing to restore their populations throughout Southern California and in Baja California, where they're native as well. And there we go. Okay, we're off. So. As you may have been clued in by the title of the talk this evening, the California red-legged frog is thought to be the main subject of Mark Twain's celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County story, right? And it makes sense that that would be that frog. It's a very big frog, as we were discussing before the meeting started. The California red-legged frog is the largest native frog in the western United States. Bullfrogs out east in their native range, generally east of the Mississippi River, are the biggest frog in the country. But out here in the west, California red-legged frogs are quite big. And so it makes sense that Mark Twain would write a story about this species and their ability to jump, just because their size is such a presence compared to a lot of the other amphibians, the frogs and toads that would have been around in that area at that time. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit first, just a brief Amphibians 101 to get everyone up to speed and on board about what we're talking about today and what amphibians are and why they're important. I'm going to talk a little bit about amphibian declines, so why amphibians are in peril around the world and including the United States and California. And then I'll get to our main character today, the California red-legged frog. We'll talk a little bit about them. We'll talk about local conservation and restoration efforts in our region. And we'll talk about what our plans are for the future. Okay, so amphibians, if you break it down, uh, amphi is both in Greek, and bios is, of course, life, right? So what we're talking about is having both lives. These organisms have a double life, meaning they're living in water and on land. So that name really clues us into their life cycle and how complex it is compared to a lot of Earth, at least for vertebrates, other mammals and birds and fish, and they breathe through their skin. So their skin is really permeable. It allows uh, substances in their environment to pass through. So they're able to absorb things in the water through their skin, including the ability to take in oxygen. They do breathe. Those that have lungs use lungs to breathe as well. but they have that ability to take in some percentage through their skin, which is really odd and really cool. Um, they don't need to drink water because if they're sitting in water or a moist environment, that's how they'll take in water and fluids. And as you might imagine, because of their permeability of their skin, they're really sensitive to the environmental conditions that they live in, right? So we often call amphibians the ecological indicators. So similar to the concept of the canary in the coal mine, and that old adage and that old practice of bringing birds into coal mines to alert miners if they are facing poor conditions in the mine. The same can be said about amphibians and their health in the environment. So they're really important indicators for telling us and giving us clues how our water quality is doing. As we talked about their name, they have these dual lives in two ways. One is most of them go through what we call metamorphosis as they develop. So similar in a way to when we're thinking of something like a butterfly, frogs and toads and salamanders, they'll all start out as eggs. Typically, those eggs are in the environment. They're usually not inside an individual amphibian. They'll be laid in the environment and underwater or in a burrow. Those eggs will then hatch into a larval stage. For frogs and toads, those are what we call tadpoles. So those tadpoles will then swim around in water. They'll feed on typically algae and vegetative matter, although some species are carnivores at that stage. And then those tadpoles will grow. They'll reabsorb their tail. They'll start to sprout their limbs, their legs, and their feet and their arms. And then they'll transition to land and come out of the water and become semi-terrestrial beings in their adult or terrestrial stage most of the time. They'll still be going back into water or living in or close by, but because they have appendages now, they have ability to crawl on land and breathe air and all of that, right? So they can live both lives on land and in water. And amphibians in general also are really ancient. So these animals have really seen it all. They were around hundreds of millions of years ago, before the dinosaurs, during the dinosaurs, during and after the big asteroid impact. They've survived ice ages. They've really seen a lot of Earth, which is incredible as a lineage. And that's kind of what makes looking at where we are now in our current times even more concerning, right? Because if they've been around this long and remained relatively unchanged through all of these chaotic events, and if they're not doing well now, and I think that says something about the impacts of our time on their populations, and we'll get into that more in a minute here. And again, so I just want to reiterate, amphibians are come in several groups. They're frogs and toads, so what we call anurans. Frogs and toads are amphibians. We have salamanders and newts, right? Those are amphibians as well. A lot of the time in the Western US and California, most of our salamanders are actually terrestrial. So very few actually live primarily or exclusively in the water. Most of them are in burrows or underground, under rocks, under logs. Slender salamander here, which is one of our more common species, though they're still very secretive. And then there's also this group that some of you may not have heard of before, which are called Sicilians. And they are also a type of amphibian. They're pretty rare. They're very secretive. As you can tell by looking at them, they kind of look like a centipede or a worm. but they're not either of those. They are amphibians. They have permeable skin, and most of the Sicilian diversity, well, all of it is in the tropics or subtropics, places like India and Thailand, and they live underground, as you can also tell by their shape. They look like worms or millipedes or centipedes that live underground, right? And so, same type of body style here is that they're primarily fossorial, meaning they're underground. They're eating small mites and invertebrates and things, and occasionally they'll come to the surface. And they're able to do this because the soils in the tropics are really moist. So while they may never be in water, a pool of water necessarily, they're always in a really moist soil environment underground. We don't know a lot about them because they're hard to find in the wild. You got to do a lot of raking and digging, but they're really cool. So another amphibian to think about. I've been to the tropics a few times, and unfortunately, I've never seen a Sicilian in the wild. Okay, so a little bit of doom and gloom for a second. Amphibians around the world are declining. So frogs, toads, salamanders, newts, and those Sicilians. As of about a month ago, the scientific community knew of 8,974 amphibian species in the world. Those are the ones that are formally described by Western science. And of those, almost 9,000, 40% of them are threatened with extinction due to a variety of reasons. And this map here is just showing from this scientific paper the number of species that are threatened with extinction worldwide. And you can see that a lot of that highlighting the red, where there's a lot of species, are in those tropical regions, which makes sense because that's where a lot of the amphibian diversity is to begin with. And so, like a lot of things, unfortunately, there's a lot of different reasons that add up for amphibians worldwide as to what's causing these declines. And when I say declines, I do mean extinction. So there are species that we absolutely know, we've documented that they used to be somewhere and now they're completely gone, and there's none of them left in the entire world. Some are extinct in the wild, where there may still be some in captivity in zoos or captive propagation colonies. And there are others, when we're talking about declines, where their population sizes have declined in size, but they might still remain in several locations, but just not as robust as they used to be. So declines, this term kind of refers to all of these metrics overall. And so this chart here is just showing what the major causes are. A lot of it is human induced. So that's this set of green characters here, whether it's pollution, development, harvesting of timber and plants, agricultural development. A lot of it has to do with just losing land mass and natural areas to disturbance, no matter how big or little that disturbance is. Um, some of that is overexploitation there in the light blue, so harvesting and hunting, and that also includes non-lethal harvesting for industries like the pet trade, surprisingly. Then, of course, there's effects of climate change, which, at least in California and in the West, we typically think of those threats as being as showing themselves as drought, right? And that can also include increased fire risk. And then there's these two names here in the bright red and the gray. Those are the names of two fungal diseases. You may have heard of chytrid fungus. It's a fungal pathogen that a spore that is transmitted in water, and it infects amphibian skin. It doesn't hurt humans or mammals or any other species. It's just for amphibians, and it burrows in their skin, this fungal spore, and it uses their skin as a place to reproduce asexually. And so it generates thousands and thousands of more spores, and that's creating a cyst on the amphibian skin. And because we learned that amphibian skin is very permeable and sensitive, and that's a way they breathe and regulate their bodies, you can imagine that a skin infection for an amphibian is quite a serious issue compared to maybe a human, right? And so these skin fungal lesions generally result in amphibian species going into cardiac arrest, losing osmotic function, passing solutions throughout their skin to regulate their body, and they end up dying. So these diseases, these fungal diseases, are really serious. I've spent a lot of my career studying them. And then at the bottom here, we have invasive species like bullfrogs, crayfish, predatory fish in general as major causes. And we'll circle back to some of these specifically for the red-legged frog. And I'll just mention again, I'm sure most of you are well trained on these talks, but please, I'd love to talk about anything that I mention today or anything I don't mention as well that you think I could comment on. So please feel free to write down questions as they come up, and I'd love to talk about them at the end of the talk. Okay, so why do we care about amphibians? Probably don't need to explain this much to this group, but it's always good to think about. Maybe there's a few things here that maybe don't come to your mind right away. So amphibians overall, they're important for our ecosystems. As we talked about, they're important linkages between aquatic and terrestrial environments because they play those dual roles in their life. And that means they're important prey and predator sources in the ecosystem and play valuable roles. Again, because they're so old, those hundreds of millions of years have gone by where these creatures and their relatives have been around on this planet. They provide a really great system to study how the diversity of life has evolved on Earth. Because we can track them throughout the geologic and the biological record. They provide services to us for our well-being. A lot of that has to do with pest services. They are important predators of pests like mosquitoes, which we all hate, and they're also important predators of crop pests, believe it or not. In some areas in Brazil, for example, where there's a lot of soy bean production, Brazil and Argentina, there's been studies showing that the frogs in those regions are really important predators of soy pests. And so they provide an economic benefit to agricultural industry as well. They're important for medical advancements. So because, again, their skin is so unique and so sensitive, there's a lot of really interesting compounds and molecules that are in their skin and in their bodies in general that help them regulate themselves in the environment. And a lot of studies are showing promise where there are potential treatments for cancers, treatments for HIV, blood pressure medications that come out of studies analyzing certain microbial properties of amphibian skin, which is really cool. I'm sure a lot of you, again, are familiar in the bird world of how much ecotourism and birding draws economic benefits in communities around the world. The same thing, not as much, of course, for amphibians, but there definitely is ecotouristic amphibians in these protecting natural areas around the world. And another one to think about here is how culturally important they are. And we started with Tina mentioning some indigenous roles and names and stories for amphibians and frogs locally for us, and that can be said many times over around the world. They're so fascinating, and they've been around for so long that you can find a lot of interesting stories and tales around the world. So I think all of this being said, and the fact that, my personal worldview is that because it's a living being, that it deserves a right to live on our planet with us, that all of these reasons are why we care. All right, so let's transition here and talk about our main character, this California red-legged frog. The scientific name is Rana draytonii. This frog, as we mentioned earlier, is the largest native frog in the western U.S. It can be up to 5 inches long, and they can be pretty hefty critters as well. If you see one or get one in hand, they were voted and passed the California legislature in 2014 as the state amphibian of California. And they've declined, as many of these other species that we've talked about around the world. They're no, they have declined throughout their range in California for at least 100 years or so. And we'll get into some of the history of that in a second as well. In 1996, they were listed on the Endangered Species Act as threatened. So not the endangered status, the top status, but the next status down is threatened. And that provides resources, but also some red tape for studying and trying to conserve the species. And if you look at the map here, this is from CaliforniaHerps.com, which is a great resource for looking up factual information, photos, and other things about reptiles and amphibians in our state. And you can see we're focused here on this orange portion. This is where the California red-legged frog historically occurred, roughly. We don't have exact records everywhere, so I can't vouch for all of these tiny little indents and lines everywhere, but it's a rough description, right? And then up in red in Northern California there, that's the range of the northern red-legged frog. It was thought at one time that these two species were one species and that they were just different subspecies. But some genetic work in the early 2000s confirmed that they are indeed two different species. So today I'll be focusing on the frog in the orange here, the California red-legged frog. But the northern red-legged frog is pretty similar. And that range extends up through Oregon and Washington, actually. It gets cut off. And speaking of that, I'll also mention, as I said before, again, that while this map cuts off in San Diego County here in the south, historically the frog did and does occur into Baja California, Mexico. And I'll show another map a little later that includes that part of the range. So some of the threats specifically for California red-legged frogs in California include water diversion and urban development, habitat fragmentation, etc. Right? And so locally, I thought this was a fun little exercise here into this talk. So looking at our local area, that's probably pretty familiar to a lot of you. If you look back on Google Earth, which is fun to do, we look back to 1985, this left panel, and we can compare that to what it looks like, that land cover looks like now in 2025. And I'll point out a few areas of interest. Just if you glance, probably notice a lot of areas that have transitioned to development, but I'll highlight a few here. So Terramar development there in yellow, La Costa and orange. If you compare those orange arrows, you can see what was bare ground in that 85 satellite image compared to now. The pink San Elijo Hills has really been developed. Forest Ranch, a lot. And then this reservoir popped up out of nowhere. You look on the 1985 map, there's nothing there. Just north west of Lake Hodges, there was just a natural small drainage there and some bare land, and now there's that huge reservoir there. So these are just some examples in a very small area in a relatively short time span, showing you how much development can happen, right? And now if we go back over 100, 150 years of all the things we've done to our environment, not only urbanization and fragmenting the habitat, but especially like the reservoir here, damming and just augmenting our water resources, and changing the natural hydrologic cycles, and the way water flows on the landscape. Yeah, you can imagine is really impactful for amphibians, right? The red-legged frog is no exception. They're really tied to water. They don't travel over land in dry areas very much. You're going to find them, within, couple hundred feet of water, if not much closer than that, the majority of time. So, making these changes in our environment over a large scale throughout Southern California and throughout the entire state, has really affected their ability to persist on the landscape. If they don't have a uh, a natural area, a water body that's protected, then they're not going to be doing so well. And you may think, oh, good, there's a reservoir, there's a water source there that wasn't there before. That should be good for amphibians, right? Well, not really, just for a couple reasons. One, the scale of that reservoir is just way too large. It's way too deep. The It's also controlled, right? So they'll lower and raise it, well, lower it at least, and maybe fill it at some point on a controlled schedule, which does not align with the natural cycles of these amphibians. So the drastic amount of difference in the water levels, tens of feet, where they can drop, is just way too dramatic, for these little creatures. And then the other thing is they'll introduce predatory fish that weren't natively on the landscape for anglers. Other non-native species will colonize these places because they're a little hardier, like bullfrogs or crayfish, and those are big competitors and predators for this species. So yes, it's more water technically on the landscape at the surface level, but it's not the right kind of water. Okay, and then so now we're going to take a little history lesson back, as we let Mark Twain guide us from the beginning on a little more of the issues of bullfrogs and why they're so evil for California red-legged frogs. And so this story, the jumping frog of Calaveras County, is important because not only is it this interesting satire, as Mark Twain often wrote, about the West and these tall tales and these big personalities, for the story itself, but I think it's also telling why he chose it to center around these frogs, these California red-legged frogs. And that's because they were really prolific, and they were really center stage in a lot of ways at the time in popular culture and society. And that's because they were a food source. Around this time, starting in the gold in the 1840s and 1850s in California, set off by the mining booms, these red-legged frogs were hunted for not just subsistence, but for market. This is a table from a scientific paper that did some historical research on records in California around the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century. And these data from the late 1890s are really interesting. A lot of this is up in Northern California. But if you look at even at the time, 1895, this first columns, and let's look at Napa County. What was reported as a 7,000 kilogram harvest of frogs, and this is what was captured in the wild. A lot of this is presumed to be red-legged frogs because they're doing this for market to sell for frog legs to eat, and you want the biggest frog legs available. It's like chicken wings, right? You don't want tiny little chicken wings. You want a nice big wing when you get some wings. So same thing with frog legs. So they're not hunting our little California tree frogs or other species. They want some big meaty frog legs. And you can see that value there, $4,000 for that amount. You just go fast forward a few years later in 1899, the harvest amount for Napa County is now magnitudes lower. It's only about 1,600 kilograms. But the value is still pretty high, $3,600 at only $400 less for multiple thousands less in actual weight of frog legs. So this kind of tells us, right, that even in this short amount of time, the the market for frog legs was not declining, and that's not why the value and the harvest was less. It's that the value actually increased because they weren't able to harvest as much even in 4 years. So you can start seeing a depletion on the landscape, the native depletion of these species in the wild, where these frog hunters weren't just able to go out and capture a bunch anymore because they were over harvesting them. And this had been going on for decades, likely, but we just have a small snapshot here at the end of the 19th century. I find this stuff really interesting. I'm also a history person and California history person, and it's really cool to see some of these records and kind of connect the puzzle pieces to tell the story of what happened to this species. Okay, so in California and really all over the country, there was this frenzy for frog legs as a cuisine. French influences and French chefs and French cuisine, as it is kind of unchanged today, it's held in high regard. People will pay more for French cooking. It has a higher value, right? It's higher perceived value, at least. And at the time, these recipes from the continent, from Europe, especially France, there are a lot of classic recipes for frog legs. And so not only were frog hunting, it goes beyond subsistence, but as I said, it goes to a market for frog legs because they were perceived as a delicacy. And so once the California red-legged frog was depleted so much in California where it just wasn't economical for hunters to go out and find the remaining frogs out there and capture them, entrepreneurs and business people started talking about frog farming. So specifically bullfrogs. And what happened, there was this character at the center of a lot of this named Alfred Broll. He was a descendant of some European well-to-do families. And he was not in California, but he was in the Midwest. And he became this frog farming entrepreneur. He founded this company called the American Frog Canning Company, and he kind of created a market for canned, ready-to-serve frog legs. I don't know if any of you have had frog legs before or enjoy them. I've actually had some bullfrog legs, barbecued ones that were removed from a wetland in California. So we were doing good work of removing the frogs, and then we were doing our sustainability portion by eating them. And they were okay. They were kind of chickeny, kind of fishy, right? Like a lot of things. But frog legs were just this hot item in all forms across the country. And so this man, Alfred Broll, really took advantage. He started this frog farm out in Ohio, eventually moving down to Louisiana. He wrote this guide called Frog Raising for Pleasure and Profit and the Broll system. And so he really took advantage of the craze. He was not only doing these frog farms and then selling the frog legs to market. He would also sell some of his frogs as breeders to people who wanted to start their own frog farms. And he would have all these pamphlets and things in the newspapers that were circulated across the country about how great it would be to have this network of frog farms and how easy it is to raise frogs and how much money you can make. And oh, by the way, here's this guide that I wrote that I can also sell you that will teach you how to make money easily on creating your own frog farm, right? And as you can tell maybe by my tone, not all of these claims were very accurate. It's really interesting study of this whole scene. Eventually, his business ultimately was a failure, a success and a failure. A success that it was very well known, and he was the guy to contact. Overall, the market was a failure because bullfrogs are, and frogs in general, amphibians in general, are not easy to keep at all. They're so sensitive. Their skin, trying to feed frogs, they need moving prey to eat. You can't just feed them pellets or something. They have that prey drive is so strong. Can't feed them frog food. They need flies and bugs and other things. And then it takes several years for them to mature and transition and be able to breed on their own. And then the whole life cycle is so antithetical as well. When you think about it, frogs have these, they lay these eggs, sometimes thousands of eggs, which will hatch out into thousands or maybe hundreds of tadpoles. And then not all those tadpoles are going to survive to transition out of the water, maybe a handful, maybe a dozen, depending on the species. And then those little frogs, only a handful of those are going to actually survive until they're adults because they're part of the food chain along the entire process, right? So you're investing all of this time into raising frogs and getting frog eggs, and you're really only getting maybe a couple frogs for every frog that is breeding, right? It just the math doesn't add up. But he was a great salesman and really kind of drove this industry, which is just fascinating looking back at the time. And so bullfrogs, the reason this is important for the red-legged frogs, not only so bullfrogs farms started popping up throughout the country. People were trying this approach. One of them was in California, one of the main ones. And it was run by this woman, Miss Edith Stedge, I believe it's pronounced, on the Stedge Ranch Frog Farm. And this is an article from 1900 in the San Francisco Call newspaper. And this quote's really interesting. It says, "The mistress of the frog farm is more expert than any of her assistants at catching frogs, and whenever a rush order enters in, it is she who superintends the filling of it. Clad in short skirts and jumper of blue cloth, her feet in high boots, she takes her place with her net in front of the boat, and with her own hand throws the net and hauls in the game. It looks simple," she laughed, "but you should see beginners trying to catch frogs." And so this ranch, the Stedge Ranch, this is outside of San Francisco, is supposedly, potentially the first introduction of bullfrogs to California, but likely around 1895 or so. We really don't have, but it's believed to be around that time, between that time and 1900, of course. And so because there aren't as many California red-legged frogs to meet this demand of frog legs, people start bringing in, importing bullfrogs from the east out to California where they, don't belong and they're not native to. And of course, there's no biosecurity, there's no fences, and so frogs are transported across the country. They'll escape, they're released and they just get everywhere. And because bullfrogs just happen to be such apex predators and such well adapted to a variety of conditions, they've just really spread all over across the state and across the western U.S. where they don't belong and they cause a lot of havoc. And as you may have known, bullfrogs are these voracious predators. So not only are they competing in their environments with native species, native amphibians that are there, but they're eating tons and tons of different things in their environment. Birds. I'm sorry that the sensitive photo there. Frogs. They're cannibals of themselves and of their taxa. So any other frogs, like red-legged frogs, they will eat anything they can fit in their mouth. And because they're so big, they can fit a lot in their mouth. This upper photo here is of a bat, some bat wings hanging out of that one's mouth. There's a fish that's really big. I mean, they are just incredible, incredible predators, and that's why they're so devastating. And unfortunately, we're the ones to blame for releasing them everywhere. And it kind of started out with this market for frog legs over 100 years ago. All right, so talked a little bit about these main reasons for why red-legged frogs have declined throughout the state. And the big portion of that decline has really been in Southern California. And we'll look at a map here in a second. So moving forward, how do we work to save this jumping frog of San Diego County? So first, where do they actually remain in Southern California in our region? This map has quite a few things here, and I'll walk you through it. So this is a snapshot as of 2019 or so. Okay, so this orange region here on the map is this genetic group that we're just going to call this California group. Okay, and this is done by that study that I mentioned previously that showed the northern red-legged and the California red-legged are two different species. Within the California red-legged, there's even some they're not subspecies, but there is evidence for some different genetics in going on, some different genealogy. They're still the same species between these green and orange blobs here. But there's enough in the DNA that's different for us to put them in a tiny little different category than the orange. Okay. So there's this orange group, which is thought to be in this blob up here. And then there's this Baja California genetic group in the green. Okay. And the last frog in Southern California, south of Los Angeles, was in 2004 at the Santa Rosa Plateau Ecological Preserve. That's in Riverside County. Um, Prior to that, in San Diego County, the last frogs were likely in the 70s, 1970s. So this whole region where there used to be tons of red-legged frogs, at least, 100 years ago, 50 to 100 to 150 years ago, we're now in 2004 down to this one population at the Santa Rosa Plateau for the green genetic type in Southern California. And then in this yellow square up here above Los Angeles, where it says Santa Monica Mountains, that's also a spot where California red-legged frogs were and are still today. That's the farthest south of this orange group that remains. Okay. Then if you look further down the map into Mexico, south of Ensenada, there there, San Rafael, San Telmo, and Santo Domingo. Those are names of a few drainages. And that's where some work done by a Mexican researcher in the mid 2010s found that there are still about 10 populations remaining of this same green lineage of California red-legged frog down in Baja. Now, they've always been down in Baja, but even they've declined enough where they're just concentrated in a few drainages at the very southern tip of that green block there. So at this time in 2019, this is all we have. We have 10 sites in Mexico. That one in Santa Rosa Plateau became extinct in 2004, so that wasn't there. And then we just had that yellow dot in the Santa Monica Mountains, which were a part of that California genetic group. So we had nothing from this green group in most of Southern California for at least 15 years or so. And obviously before that, just having one population isn't the greatest, right? We want dots all around this green and orange area, ideally. Um, and so this is a 260-mile gap between that yellow square and those frogs down in Mexico, where there should be frogs there. There were historically, but they weren't there anymore. And so, how do we know where they used to be if we zoom in San Diego County specifically, for example? Well, this is where the museum, the NAT, where I work, this is where, this is our bread and butter. This is where we can really shine, right? So, not only in the public spaces of natural history museums do we have exhibits about different fossils and the natural history of the region that we're in, but in the basement, we actually have a large research collection of frog and other specimens that have been collected around California for up to 100 years ago. So we get a really nice snapshot in time, through time, of where these frogs were because we have the actual frogs preserved and we know where most of them were collected at the time. And so this map here is showing where all of our specimens just in our museum are. And there's some others, pardon me, I misspoke there. These are dots from our museum, which is mostly our museum, but also some others, including the LA County Natural History Museum and the Cal Academy in the Bay Area. Those are the couple main natural history museums that would have this species anyway. And so these black dots show us where red-legged frogs were throughout our county at any given time. And there's a lot. They're not in any of those places anymore, unfortunately. But if we want to bring them back, this gives us a good idea of maybe where to start and where we can investigate. Okay, well, they were, in this river or they were in this area near Mount Palomar. Historically, are there any areas nearby that would be suitable for them today? And that's part of what we're doing now at the museum and with our partners is we're trying to understand where they were, and then just a quick Google map, Google image view of some of these locations, we can see what they look like. So here at the top, here's the outlet of Sentinel Canyon. And it's very dry out there. And we're looking at this wash that goes under the bridge here. Doesn't look very hospitable to frogs these days, right? That thing may flood in some really strong rains from time to time, but nowadays there's just not enough permanent water. So if we wanted to put frogs back where we have records of for that location, it's probably not going to be the best for our current conditions, and then especially if we think about the future and what climate change holds for us, right? And so we can start getting glimpses of what some of these areas are like, and that's part of my role at the museum as well. As I'll be, over the next year or two, I'll be going out to a lot of these locations as well as others not on the map to try and find places that could be good spots for bringing back and reintroducing the frogs in our county and in Southern California in general. Seem to have lost my my share bar. There it is. Let me go back. Let me. No. Okay. So, Mexico, the Mexican populations down in green here, they've gone through a lot of restoration. So in 2018, starting in 2018 through 2020, our partners in Mexico, our friends, for some reason it won't let me. Oh, there. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Let's try that again. Okay. Apologies. Let me back up. We'll get to the Mexican slide in a second. So lastly, when I'm thinking about where we can bring them back, especially in San Diego County, there's a lot of questions that we have before we can select a site that could be suitable to bring them back and make sure that they thrive. So who owns the land? What invasive species are there, if any? What native species are there? Is it within the historic range? So that's where these specimens help us. What's water availability like? Is it permanent? Is it ephemeral? Is it only wet on the ground in the winter? And is it completely dry later in the spring? Because that wouldn't be great. How is the surrounding habitat? Do we need to do any restoration? Is it easy to survey if you have biologists on the ground after reintroduction? Is it hard to survey? Are there a lot of willows, or is it really steep or something like that that makes it hard to look for them? Thinking about impacts of drought and climate change. Is the landowner willing to have this listed endangered species on their land? And that also ties into are we able to have a legal framework and an agreement there where that species can be on that land, whether it's a governmental partner or a private a landowner? There's a variety of options for us. So these are a lot of things that we're thinking about as we're planning for reintroductions. Okay, so restoration practices were started in Mexico in 2018, and these were done by our partner Annie Peralta Garcia. She's the founder and head of this nonprofit called Fauna del Noreste. They're based out of Ensenada. And Annie and her team have done some serious work, as you can tell by the big rigs in these pictures, at a lot of these remaining sites down in Baja for the frog, building ponds and restoring areas to make sure that the frogs that are there can thrive in the future and expand. And so here's an example of what one of those ponds looks like. There's some people there on the top of the pond in red. If you can see the size, I mean, these are some decent sized ponds that are being dug on some private ranch lands down in Baja. And these places have really grown and started to thrive. This is a photo just a year later, and you can see how nice it's looking. The water's filled in, you're starting to get some nice vegetation. And nowadays it looks amazing. And just in this short time, from 2018 to 2020 or so, just a couple years of these ponds that were built and dug out, the frog populations in Baja actually just exploded. They boomed. They were loving what Annie and her team had done for these restored areas. And this leads us to how we're able to bring back the California red-legged frog into San Diego and to Riverside County. So because of their work and because they were so successful, we were actually in 2020 able to start this binational translocation, meaning that we're bringing frogs or the frog genetics. In this case, we're bringing egg masses up from Mexico across the border into Southern California and releasing them at some sites in Southern California. And those are those red triangles there. Santa Rosa Plateau. So we're bringing them back to that same place where they became extirpated in 2004. And then also in a site near Mesa Grande on a private landowner's property who was very willing to work with us and wanted to conserve this species. So over the last 6 years or so, the NAT, as well as our partners, governmental and nonprofit partner, have initiated this translocation project, and we've been able to release over 25,000 tadpoles in the U.S. at these two locations. We're currently in a process of assessing the success of these translocations or reintroductions. That's part of my job at the NAT as well. So I'm poring over a lot of data that's been collected over the years and trying to understand what we've done well and what we can improve and how that's going to inform planning for the future as we want to expand and add more red triangles in this area over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll just share here too. This binational translocation is really unique. We're one of only several species, a couple of the notable ones that have had this Mexican and U.S. relationship, like California condors. We've moved them down actually into some of the same region as the frogs. They're in the San Pedro Martir mountain range, and Mexican wolves as well. So we rank right up there with those awesome projects. All right, so to pretty much finish out here, I'm going to go through the day in the life or the 2 days in the life of a translocated frog egg during this process to show you, give you a sense of all of the effort, all of the teamwork, and all of the blood, sweat, and tears involved, and the love we have for this species here. So it starts out in our restoration ponds in Mexico. And we're surveying for eggs. We're in the water. We're in waders. We're geared up. We're visually looking for eggs. And by the way, right now is egg season. So these frogs are breeding in late December through March or so. So this is the time of year where we're looking for eggs when they would be in the water and they're fresh before they start hatching. And once we find an egg mass, we'll flag it and we'll take some measurements of it, and then we'll know where it is so we can come back to it the next morning. If it looks healthy and it looks fresh and suitable, then we'll come back the next morning to harvest it around 4 a.m. And here's what a red-legged frog egg mass looks like. And I say egg mass because it's a mat. We call it a mass. It's a big globular grouping of all of these eggs. We think about 1,000. They're hard to count individually. And there's a natural glue that's deposited when the female deposits the eggs externally, and they're stuck to some vegetation underwater so they don't float away or get moved around. And so when we find eggs, then we're going to take a portion of them. Here's what it looks like from the surface. So as you're looking, as a biologist looking in the water, you kind of see this jelly type thing. Maybe it looks like a bunch of tapioca balls, some boba or something. And so they're pretty cryptic. They can be hard to find, but they're generally near the surface. And so our permits allow us to take just a portion, 20% of one egg mass. And we have to find 5 egg masses in the wild to be able to harvest 20% of one of them. So we're making sure that we're not depleting what's there and all the hard work that Annie and her team has done in Mexico. We're just taking a small portion back to the US. We pack them up in these Yeti coolers with a bunch of ice blocks to keep them cold and some air regulation. And then the first year, before I was on the project, they actually used a helicopter. So they loaded this big Yeti cooler full of eggs on a helicopter, got to near the border. They were picked up in a NAT truck, brought up to the border, gone through inspection, gone through all of our paperwork for importing biological material. Then we transfer them over to our USGS governmental partners in another vehicle right across the border. This is in Tecate this time. Then they take them up to one of the reintroduction sites. You can see our collaborator Liz here is so excited. These are photos from the very first translocation in 2020, just before the pandemic hit in February. So we were battling a lot of different things at the time. And then the eggs or larvae are made sure that they're healthy, they're looking good. They're poured into some bags to make sure they're safe, and then they're released into our conservation ponds with our partners, and they'll be in these mesh cages to protect them from predation and allow us to come back and monitor and make sure they're doing okay and they're developing okay. And then once they hatch out into tadpoles, then we'll release them out of those bags and they can go. And so the main thing is that, we don't, I mean, we would love to be doing this forever, but we also want the frogs to be able to take care of themselves at some point too. We can't be doing this for decades and decades, right? It's a lot of work, it's a lot of logistics, it's a lot of money, a lot of time. And so we want to make sure that the frogs now in Southern California are going to breed on their own. That they don't need our help and we don't need to keep rebringing eggs. And so one way the Gnat has been involved in trying to understand if they're breeding is we set out these audio moth acoustic recorders. A lot of researchers and citizen science groups and lay people will use these in their backyards or what have you. And it's just a device that's recording. It's writing those files. It has a microphone. It's writing those files to an SD card, and then you can process that and listen to the files later. And so we record 1 minute for every 10 minutes. And we do that between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m. So that's 12 hours a day. We have 12 units across our two sites. So 1 week of recording is 84 hours across all of that. And so if we were to sit down, or a couple of us were to sit down and manually listen to all of these 1 minute snippets, 84 hours of them, it would take forever, take 84 hours, right? So we're working with the Nature Conservancy and some technological partners in developing a model, this AI model that works on the back end of BirdNet, similar to the products that Cornell Lab of Ornithology uses for their work, right? Anytime we're using Merlin, same kind of thing. But we developed a custom model for the red-legged frog, and we trained it on that. And now it's able to cut down all of that time into maybe just a couple hours of cross verification and running the computation side of it. And we use this because one, are the frogs breeding? Well, if you didn't know, frog calls are done almost exclusively by the males, and they are advertising calls for reproduction. They're trying to call in the females. They're just like bird breeding calls, breeding songs, right? Same thing. That's what frogs are doing most of the time when they're calling. And so if we can hear them calling, that tells us one, the males are there and they're trying to breed at least. Two, it can aid in the egg searching. So as you saw before, the eggs can be kind of hard to find, especially depending on what kind of vegetation is there. And so if we set up these audio monitors, we can then tell our partners, hey, we heard a bunch of calling on this night, this night, and this night. You should go search by that audio monitor. Can also help us detect bullfrogs. So if we hear bullfrogs on our audio monitors, then it'll tell us too, hey, maybe there's some bullfrogs moving into the area. We need to send out some teams to go capture them and remove them from that area so they don't harm our red-legged frogs. And so it works in a way. So here's one of our sites, and we have these audio monitors, 6 of them stationed throughout the pond. And so because it's such a large area, for instance, the frogs are really calling at 4 and 5, those audio monitors number 4 and 5, where those stars are. So that can help guide our team to say, hey, really search hard on that shore. It doesn't sound like they're calling on the other areas, so you don't need to look as much, but really focus on that area. Because if they're calling a lot, that means a female might come, and that might be some successful breeding, and that we'll find some eggs there. So it's a lot of work still. And there's a lot of sounds happening right in the night that we can record. These are some of our native species that we would find in San Diego. A lot of different sounds throughout the night can be heard. favorite calls. But what we're listening for, if you listen really closely, is that chuckle. Did you hear that? It's going through with the while this red-legged frog is calling. Kind of sounds like someone's rubbing the side of a balloon, maybe. And because it's so low, and in the background you're hearing all the tree frogs calling, the really loud kind of traditional frog sound that we're probably all familiar with. Even for the AI that we're using, that call is really hard for the model to pick up. It's been quite a challenge. So it's not perfect yet, but it's on its way to being a really good resource for us. It's still very good. Um, but yeah, hearing those calls is really interesting. And so here's what the sonogram, the night soundscape looks like. So the red-legged frog indications are in red there. You can barely see little bumps in the kilohertz spectrum. There's crickets going on. There's a car in the distance sometimes. The tree frogs here on the right-hand side are really just kind of noisy in the file. So there's all sorts of things going on in these audio files, which is really interesting. This is really where, AI and the technology movement that's happening can really be used for good. Because I know, trust me, for me, there's a lot out there that's scary about some of this stuff. But I think this is one area where it's going to be really useful. So after 6 years, our first wild breeding occurred just last spring. It happened at our Riverside County site at that Santa Rosa Plateau Reserve. They had egg masses. Here's a photo of the egg mass. Our audio monitoring was able to guide our partners into finding where likely some eggs were left. They found them. Hopefully, in San Diego County this year, they'll breed. We're continuing to look for new partners for locations for future reintroductions. A lot of people reach out to us. So if you or someone has property somewhere that you think they'd be interested in talking about being a part of the future for California red-legged frogs in San Diego, please, let them get in touch with us. We'd be happy to talk. And you're doing your part as well for the red-legged frogs goes beyond that. iNaturalist is a great resource. I'm sure many of you are using it. Reporting bullfrogs on iNaturalist is a great way to show researchers like me, because I can't be everywhere at once, where bullfrogs are and where maybe we shouldn't be putting frogs in the future. So there's a lot of partners on our team. Fish and Wildlife Service from the federal government. We have our Mexican partners, Fauna del Noreste, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Geological Survey, and the Nature Conservancy have been really working as a core team for the last 5 or 6 years, and subsets of these teams for almost 20 years for this species throughout Southern California, and it's a real privilege to be working with everyone here. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it, and happy to stick around for the next 15 minutes or however long people are around to answer any questions. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Bennett. That was a very, very interesting talk. I know I learned a lot that I didn't know, and fascinating. You made the subject of frogs much more fascinating than I, as a birder, would have anticipated.
I was telling Deborah a few weeks ago when we were chatting that, joking that, for me as a herper, someone who's interested in amphibians and reptiles, I'm always looking on the ground for things, right? And if the herping isn't good, the weather's not good, I'll reluctantly pick up my binoculars and start looking up, right, at some birds. So I think we can all appreciate our the critters that we're happy to see, right?
Yeah, sometimes we just have to change our perspective a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions before we let Bennett go? No, I think that you covered your subject matter very, very well.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. As you said, I hope it's informative. I see some questions
Looks
here in
like,
the chat.
yeah,
Yeah, so from Linda, are the Pacific chorus frogs the same as the tree frogs? Yeah, so typical scientist taxonomy fashion, right? Any resource you pick up, whether it's a field guide or you look online, there's always the names are always changing, especially common names, right? And I'm sure you all know this in the bird world too. Um, Pacific chorus frogs are what I would consider a tree frog. So you can call them Pacific tree frogs or Pacific chorus frogs. It's generally the same thing. That's our main, most common frog species in San Diego County. That we do have another tree frog or chorus frog species, uh, and that is the scientific name is Pseudacris cadaverina, and that tree frog sounds a little bit different. It's mostly in more canyon areas. But so we do have two chorus frogs technically, but the most common one you'll come across is that Pacific chorus frog. Yeah. Let's see. And then was there another question? You see frogs at wilderness gardens. Would those be bullfrogs? I don't know. I'm not familiar with wilderness gardens. Let's see. Where is it? Oh yeah, out there. Oh, by Paula. Um, Depends on the size. So there's definitely bullfrogs in that drainage. Unfortunately, in the San Luis Rey, a lot of bullfrogs. It could be bullfrogs if they're a good size. But it could be chorus frogs as well. It's likely, unfortunately, not red-legged frogs. There were a lot of surveys done in the 2000s by team members at the NAT and with USGS who went to all of these historic places that I showed on some of my maps earlier, looking to double check that they were in fact not there, and they weren't. So, as far as we know, there aren't any red-legged frogs out there other than where we've put them in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, Jim.
well, Bennett, we'll keep up with what your research is doing and how you guys are progressing. It looks like it takes a lot of patience and perseverance to
Yeah,
bring these
yeah.
back, but
Yeah, any conservation project is a lesson in patience for sure, especially for
definitely.
amphibians that take a while to breed and kind of come into their own, right? You don't get instant success after a year or two. It's a lot of repeated effort. So,
Right.
yeah. Let's see. Einstein Bird Sanctuary in Vista has a pond but has bullfrogs. Yeah. Any chance the bullfrogs could be removed? Yeah, I mean, especially depending on the size of this pond, um, there are definitely pretty effective ways at removing bullfrogs. Another anecdote from that San Francisco Call newspaper article from 1900 on Miss Stedge, the frog farmer, was her describing how when she would get in the boat with a spotlight and spotlight the bullfrogs at night, she noticed that the bullfrogs would stay still and they wouldn't jump around and it would make it easier to catch. And
Mm.
same as 1900, 126 years later, that's still the way some of the best ways are to catch bullfrogs, particularly because they can be very skittish. Even though as big and strong as they are, they're still very skittish animals. So going out at night with a bright light to find them, to look for the shine in their eyes or to hear their call and then spotlight them, they kind of freeze in the light, and that allows someone to net them quickly and remove them. So there are definitely effective ways. It takes Even in small areas, it can take a lot of effort, a lot of person hours, and repeatedly going multiple times a month over several months, over maybe a year or two or three, because they're such prolific. But it is possible. So, if there are ponds that are really small like that, those could be good candidates.
Any other questions? If not, I think we'll say good evening. Thank everybody for coming. And thank you a lot, Bennett, for putting the time into that presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm
Very
going to
good.
put my email again in the chat here. Please, anyone, be in touch, not only about talking more about California red-legged frogs, but we as the museum, as a public interface, we're always happy to talk about any in my department, at least the herpetology department, to talk about amphibians and reptiles. So, anytime you have a question or anything like that, please reach out.
Definitely. Okay. All right. Well, good
Great.
luck to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much,
Thanks,
everyone. Appreciate
everybody.
it. Have a good
Yeah.
night.
Uh-huh. Bye-bye.